can see how this makes them an algorithm, because with the dance routine, what we're doing is we're giving instructions to our body. So we'll say move this leg or this arm or this hip, and then our output is just a sequence of movements for people to watch. Similarly with our sock, we're given the instructions on how we want to move our needles and our yarn, and then our output is just a sock, or sometimes two socks. So similarly, today we're going to be using algorithms to make music, and I'm going to hopefully convince you that that is fun, and so is coding. But why should we be interested? Well, it's kind of, most of you are here because you're interested in making music, but you might also be interested in coding, and it's similar, I guess, to reading and writing, something that most of you hopefully do. It's just a way of thinking about things, a useful way of doing things, so a way of expressing yourself, a way of passing on information to other people, and a way to remember our own thoughts and ideas. So hopefully that's kind of taught you a bit about what live coding is. We'll talk a bit about liveness in a second, but I kind of want to start by showing you some examples of how this all actually works, and how, as a composer, code is something that we might want to use as a new way of making music. So let's kind of get started with making music. So the software that I'm using today is called TidalCycles. This is open source software, which means it's something that you can download for free onto your computer and start creating code straight away. And it's used for both live gigs, and people also use it for making music in the studio as well. It's also been written so you don't need to know how to write code specifically. It's quite good for people who start and they don't really know anything. I remember when I started using it, I'd barely written any lines of code, and a lot of people have never written code before they start using it. So it's all about just expressing things through language, which is quite natural for everybody. So the name TidalCycles actually tells us a lot about how we might use this software in practice. If we think about the tide of the ocean, it's this kind of flow of constantly rising and falling, and that's caused by the kind of gravitational forces of the moon and the sun. So the cycle is the tide, kind of this constant back and forth or loop. And in this software, it's based around that idea too. So everything we do is based around the idea of a cycle, of the loop just running over and over and over. But it might be easier to hear how that sounds rather than me just explain to you. So I will jump right in. Hopefully you can see this. If anyone's got any kind of questions, feel free to ask it in the chat now, and I'm sure we can answer it as soon as possible. Yeah, so this is the software that I use. It's called TidalCycles, and I'll show you a bit now about how we can follow along. So everything basically that you'll see here, written after this D1 and this $sign, is the lines of code that we're going to be running. And everything that we can see here is just a code comment. So it's just basically a way to make notes to yourself about what's actually happening. So if you want to follow along, then all you need to do is go to this website here, estuary, estuary.mcmaster.ca. Maybe I can pop that in the chat. So, stop saying for a second. There you go. Great. So basically what we want to do if we want to follow along with this is we want to take everything that follows after this D1 and this dollar. So here we're just saying sound, and I think here we'll just use ED, which is our bass drum sound. And then we can copy that, or we can just type it into the window here. So I think when you come into this program, well, you'll see it will come up with this screen. Yeah. So if you just click solo mode for now, and it should load this screen here that you see, and then you can just click anywhere under here or here. You'll see these little boxes pop up, and we can just copy or write in the code that I'm writing here into this window. And if you press this little green button here, you should be able to hear stuff. But please make sure that you have muted microphones just in case. I don't think anyone should be able to hear you on a webinar, but just double check before you run anything. But that's how you follow along. I will kind of run through everything now in this here, which is my editor, but if you've got any questions about making sound, feel free to answer me at the end. And I hope that makes sense. So here we go, talking about the basics of making a pattern, and hopefully we'll be able to hear some sound. So if you can hear that, we hear basically just this bass drum repeating over and over and over. So it's basically saying we're going to play this sound once per cycle. And this cycle is just running over and over and over. But we might want to stop that eventually, because otherwise it will just keep running forever and ever and ever until your kind of computer gives up. So that would be interesting, but maybe not today. So we're going to stop making the sound by typing D1 $silence. And that stops everything that is in this D1 here. It will say, right, we want to stop that now. So that's okay, but we might want to make something slightly more interesting. So if you give it another thing here, so in between these double quotes, if we add in another thing, so here we have a bass drum, and here we have a snare drum. And what it's going to do, it's going to play both the bass drum and the snare drum in the same cycle. And we can keep adding stuff in here. So we can have our bass drum and then our snare drum and maybe a hi-hat and a clap. So if anyone plays drums, these are all kind of just different types of drums that we're adding to the sequence that's getting played over and over and over again. So it's kind of just this infinite drummer basically. So as you can kind of hear, it's now sounding a little bit faster. Why is it sounding faster? Because we've got everything in this sequence here. We're now playing 4 things per cycle, so everything's kind of getting squished into this cycle together, compared to just if we have one thing in the cycle. And we can keep adding things, and things will keep getting faster and faster. can also kind of manually change how fast or things, slow things go. So we go back to this loop. You can use this here, function set CPS. And I think if you're following along here, we can just use it down here where it says set new tempo. So we can give it a number value. And we can hear as the number goes up, it gets faster and faster. Similarly, if it goes down, it's getting slower and slower. So this basically here is saying how many cycles per second we want. So if there is more cycles per second, so say here this is 1 cycle per second, so this is basically playing all of this in 1 second. But if we give it a value of 0.5, which is a half, it's saying basically we have 1 cycle every 2 seconds, so this will be twice as slow as if it was at 1. So we might want to make some slightly more interesting patterns to play with. So we can kind of add different things in between these double quotes again to make a slightly more interesting pattern. So here we're giving it this start, which is kind of like a times, and then 2. So that's saying basically play this twice instead of once. We'll just leave that there. Here we have these 2 brackets, first of all, which basically groups everything into the same amount of time as one thing by itself. And we can also use this notation, which is just like a little squiggle. And that basically stops playing anything for that second of time. So you won't hear anything there, and then you'll hear a clap, and that will be here, everything will be just as fast as everything here. And then we can do times by 4 here, so we'll hear 4 in this space, where we hear 2 in this space and 1 in this space. So you can hear what that sounds like. So we can hear it's just playing that kind of over and over and over again, the same pattern. So now we've kind of explored some drum patterns. What if we want to make a synth sound too? So here I'm just giving it, instead of saying our bass drum sample, our snare, and our clap, and our hi-hat, I'm going to call something else called a synth. And so if we run that code, we should be able to hear a synth sound. We can just turn it up a bit. So what's the difference here between this and this and this? So basically, these are all samples that we're just telling the computer to play. And we can actually find all of this in a folder which our computer knows where it is. So you can find all of these here. They're just kind of saved as individual sound files on our computer. And you can see in each file there's lots and lots of different sound files in it. So we can kind of actually tell the computer to play all these different samples in the folder by using this notation, the colon, and then this will say it will start from 0. So that's the first sample. And that plays a different sample. And we can keep changing this number. And we'll get a different sound. If you're following along on the web version, I think this is actually a custom folder that I've made. So you might want to try just sound and then RP. And you'll hear a different synth. And you can hear all the different samples from that. Okay, so now we've got our sound. We might want to give it a sequence of notes to play too, to make it a bit more interesting too. So here I'm just going to give it some 4 different notes to play. And in the same way as with our drum pattern, because we've got 4 different things in between the quotes, we're going to have 4 different sound files, 4 different notes even, sorry, that are playing per cycle. So this is kind of equivalent to, if anyone's familiar with like a piano keyboard, so we'll say C5 is the middle C, and then C4 is the C below that, G4 is the G below middle C, and E5 is the E above middle C. If you're not familiar with that, don't worry, we can kind of go through another way to making sound as well. But we can just hear what that sounds like. So we see here we've got this dollar here first, so this is showing us what notes to play, and then we're just saying choose which sound we want. So we can kind of change that in the same way as before. And we'll hear different things each time. So if you're not familiar with any music theory, that's okay, because what you can actually do is you can do this where you can just give it a pattern of numbers, and you can just choose any number, and we can just say our note here again. We're using brackets here to make sure that it knows to look at everything in here, so it can tell our computer, right, we want to play all of this. And then again, we're just choosing our sound in the same way that we were doing before. And here we're just giving it this extra thing here, which says, okay, we're going to be using the major scale, and we're going to play the first note of major scale, the second note, the third note, and the fourth note. It's quite confusing because it starts at 0, but this is the first note, and this is the second note, this is the third note, and this is the fourth note. You can kind of swap these around, or you could go higher. And we can actually run, if we just type scale list and then run this code, we can see a list of all the possible scales that we could use. So maybe we would want to use something like Chinese scale. Or we could try this one here. So we can just basically keep trying different things and see how they sound. And that's basically all live coding is. It's just trying different things, changing some of these numbers and seeing what happens. And sometimes that will sound good and sometimes it will sound bad. And you just have to kind of keep on trying and see and find things that you want to listen to. And kind of eventually you'll kind of understand a bit more about the things that you like and the things that you don't like and how you might want to express that through the code. So here are some kind of useful concepts that a music composer might want to think about when composing with codes. So firstly, we have repetition. So you kind of heard that already, that whenever you run a code line, it's just playing the pattern over and over and over again. And in music, repetition is quite a cool idea because it allows us to kind of reinforce something to our listener and really get the point across to them and helps them remember that idea. Another thing that we can think about is this idea of interference. So taking this repetition and interfering a bit with it. And I'll give you some examples of all of this in a second. We also have an idea of expectation. So expectation is really interesting because, you know, we have this idea of repetition and interference, but we want to make something really interesting to listen to, and that's what most music is trying to do. So to do that, we can kind of play with people's expectations. So when you're repeating patterns over and over, you can kind of build up an image in their minds of how things should sound. And they actually start predicting ahead of time what's going to happen because you've kind of reinforced this idea over and over. So as a music composer, we can kind of take advantage of this fact. And we can build up an idea in the listener's head about what's going to happen next. And then at the last minute, we can actually change this, leaving them a bit confused about what's going on. But there's actually a lot of science behind this. And for some reason, we seem to really like that. So again, I'll kind of show a bit more about this in a second. And then the final thing is silence. Actually, one important construct in music is silence. And we can use this in conjunction with the other two as well. So sometimes when a listener is expecting to hear something, we can give them nothing, and then that kind of gets the same kind of effect as before with the expectation. You get someone expecting something, and then you get nothing, and they kind of like that. It's quite weird, but it works. So yeah, I'll show you a bit about these and how we can use them in code. So actually just a quick note as well. Once we have our patterns, we can actually start doing fun stuff to that too. So basically everything with a hashtag following it, we're actually adding an effect. So this one here, we can hear what that sounds like. It just makes it a bit more crunchy. We can add this effect too, which gives it basically the sound like it's either like the A sound or the E sound. It sounds kind of like a human trying to talk to you almost. And we can use this cutoff, which will make it sound like it's coming kind of slightly further away or kind of slightly close up to you actually. Cool. So these will kind of come in useful later, but I'll kind of go into this ideas of repetition, interference, expectation, and silence. So if we take our melody that we were using before, and again, if you're following online, try it with this harpy sound here. So this idea of interference is interesting because we take our note pattern and we'll take our sound file and we'll start to play with the sound and make it kind of crossover with itself. So here what I'm doing is I'm taking this note pattern and I'm actually going to add in at 0.125 fractions of a cycle, so that's equivalent to like 1/8 of a cycle. We're going to add in a note that's 7 notes above these notes here. So that sounds a bit confusing, but hopefully if I run it, you can kind of hear what that sounds like. Okay, and then we can do that again. And this $sign here is just kind of separating these two out, but it's just the same thing, except here we're giving it this value 0.25 instead of 0.125. And what that does is that makes it just a quarter of a cycle instead of an eighth of a cycle. So I hope you can kind of hear how that's sounding. So again, we're just adding in a note 7 notes above at an eighth of the cycle, and a note 12 notes above all of these notes at a quarter of a cycle. So now we might want to think about our expectation idea. So again, if we take this note pattern here, and we say, actually, instead of playing the G note here all the time, I actually want it to play an E note sometimes, so it will kind of alternate between playing the G note and the E note. And we could say again here, maybe we want it to play an A instead of an E. Or we could say 3 times out of 4, we want it to play this G, and then the 4th time we'll play an E. kind of see how that starts to get a bit more interesting. We can also, now that we've got our note pattern and we've got these little triangular brackets giving us a bit more interesting ideas, we can actually do this thing called adding a function as well. So again, we're just going to separate out things with this $sign. So you don't need to worry too much about what that does, but basically everything before here is just going to be applied to this note pattern. So as we're talking about it being language, we can kind of understand a bit about what this function is going to do. So we're saying every fourth cycle, so every 4 cycles out of, so first, second, third, and then the fourth cycle, this is going to happen. We're going to make it go a bit faster. And how much faster do we want it to go? We want it to go twice as fast. So it's going to play this pattern normally for 3 cycles, and then on the 4th cycle, it's going to go a bit faster. And so we can kind of do the same with our drum patterns as well. So we can start off with a repeating drum pattern, something like this. You might recognise. Or maybe we'll do this one. So again, we might want to add something that interferes with this original pattern here. So that will we'll use some more notation here. So we're putting everything in square brackets, but after this pattern here, which is just the same as this one here, we're going to put a comma, and we're going to add this pattern here, which is basically just a repeating pattern of 3 notes, which are kind of divided into 8 parts of the cycle. And then it's going to play a clap sound. So basically what it's going to do is create something called a polyrhythm, which is when you layer 2 different rhythms kind of on top of each other. So this was just the original pattern. Now with our added pattern. And in the same way before, we're going to take this pattern. We're going to add in these kind of little angle brackets again, which say on the first time round we're going to play this, and the second time round we're going to play this. And we're going to do this kind of notation with a little comma. And then we're going to say, in the same way as before, every 4th cycle, so 1, 2, 3 cycles, it's going to play this normally, and then on the 4th cycle, it's going to play it twice as fast. Kind of hopefully you can hear how that's all coming together, and we can actually combine this expectation here with the kind of melody that we've been doing earlier by using these. So I kind of told you to ignore this before with D1, but actually we can use D2 now as well. It's just if we want to add more than one pattern and we want to play them together, we can just use these different variable names, that's what they're called, so D1 and D2. So if you're following along in the online version, you can just click on a different window and you can kind of type in the different window and press play up here, and it should play these two together. But yeah, so we can hear what our note pattern and our drum pattern sounds like together. We can kind of change the tempo. Cool. And then finally, we can kind of get rid of stuff as well. So we can kind of use this solo function and this unsolo as well, which will, if we're playing two things together, if we solo that, we can only hear everything that's playing on this D1. And we can bring it all back together. And now I'll just briefly whiz through some things about performing with live code as well. I think it's probably only got about 5 minutes left. So here we're going to take a sample called numbers.
0, 0.
And actually what we want to do is randomly choose, because randomness is kind of something really interesting that you can do when you're playing live. So here we're going to basically randomly choose out of the 8 samples in this folder called numbers, which ones we want to play.
3, 4, 5, 2, 3, 4, 4, 5, 2.
Instead of just doing this randomly here, we could also choose. So we could say either play this is the first sample, or this is the 9th sample. So we can hear what that sounds like.
8, 0, 0, 8, 8, 8, 8, 8.
So here, it's not always just playing them back to back, but it's actually the computer is now taking some of the control and it's choosing which sample it wants to play. I'm actually not telling it explicitly how to play that. So there's some other kind of interesting random functions. So we can say random, so sometimes, which means sometimes it will do it. Often, which means it will kind of do it more frequently than sometimes. And this can kind of get rid of stuff. So I'll quickly run through. And so it's going to say, sometimes it's going to go twice as fast. Here it will do it more often. It will choose to go twice as fast. And here we can say, get rid of it sometimes. Cool, and then quickly, I'll just show some kind of different functions that you can use as well when you're performing live. So do you remember before we had this cutoff function where it made it sound far away when we had smaller numbers? And then as we increase it, it sounds like it's getting closer to us. So what we're actually doing here is we're telling the computer to go between these two values, between 200 and 2400, and we're going to give it a function. So if anyone knows this in maths, you have like a sine wave, so it's kind of like this up and down, like a kind of wave in the sea. It goes kind of up and down between low and high. So we can hear that it will make this pattern sound like it's going between far away and close. And similarly, we could have it, instead of like a sine, like going up and down that way, we could have it like a square where it goes high and then low and then high and then low. And then we could have it like a triangle, so where it goes slowly up until it gets to its highest point and then slowly down to its lowest point. Cool. And I think I'm probably out of time now, so yeah, maybe we should take some questions now.
That was great. Thanks so much, Lizzie.
No worries.
Yeah, it was really inspiring, and I really liked what you said at the beginning about kind of shifting your perception of coding and treating it just like another form of expression, like a dance routine, or
Yeah.
that was really cool.
Yeah, I think often when we hear code, we think of, you know, nerds behind a computer screen, like staying up till midnight, and it actually can just be a way of kind of talking to a computer or to yourself, or just kind of getting ideas and kind of writing it down on a computer. So yeah, it's not as scary, I don't think, as, well, hopefully I've kind of shown that it's not as scary as it sometimes seems. Yeah. So yeah,
you did totally. We've got a question, so obviously if anyone has any questions, please post them in the Q&A tab, but we've got one question so far.
right.
And the question is, I'd like to know how you got into TidalCycles. What was your journey like, and
Okay.
how did you get into using that program?
That's okay. So I actually got into it through another friend of mine. She basically, she was doing this before I was doing it, and sometimes she would play gigs, or she would play, sometimes come around to my friend's house and she'd bring her laptop and she'd kind of plug it into like a system of speakers, and kind of she'd be sharing her code, and like I just remember thinking like, wow, this is so cool. Like it looks kind of confusing, but I'm kind of really interested in it and like what's going on. And that's another thing, is a lot of times people tend to share their code when they're playing live, so you can kind of get to see a bit about what's happening. So I remember kind of seeing it and thinking, this is so cool. And then I think one weekend I was just really bored, and I kind of knew a bit about TidalCycles through kind of a couple of friends, so I kind of downloaded it, thinking I might use it like once or twice, and then I just spent like the whole weekend being like, oh my god, this is so fun. So yeah, it was just kind of a process of seeing other people using it and thinking, you know, this is cool, maybe I could try it myself. They also kind of ran a few workshops up in the north. So I used to be living in Leeds, and they used to run workshops there for women and non-binary as well, which kind of helped demystify some. So I kind of felt at that time I didn't really know how to code at all. Like I wasn't a professional programmer or anything. Like it did seem a bit scary to me, and it was nice to see people actually kind of breaking down these boundaries and saying, you know what, it is quite easy. It's not difficult. Anyone can do this. All you need is like a laptop. And yeah, that's kind of how I got into it. So.
That's really cool. I've got another question, and it kind of leads on from a question that I was just thinking about actually when you were showing some examples. And it says, in what contexts do you perform live? Do you collaborate in performance with other programmers, other electronic instruments or traditional instruments, so other performers?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, actually. Sometimes I play by myself, like I play the most by myself, and that's been in kind of lots of different contexts. So I've played at some like festivals, which tends to kind of blow people's minds a little bit. I don't think they're expecting it, and they're like, what's going on? What is this? But like I've played at kind of smaller venues as well, which is really nice. And I've actually started doing a lot of collaboration as well, which I think is actually really interesting, that you can kind of, there's ways to kind of connect what I'm doing with TidalCycles and play with either people who are using other electronic instruments. So if anyone's like familiar with like synthesizers, I kind of played with other people who use just like traditional synthesizers. But I'm also really interested in like collaborating with like people who use traditional like musical instruments as well. I think that's like a really interesting thing. Like there's a couple of other people who do things like one person will be coding and one person will be drumming, and they're trying to kind of keep in tempo together, and it has some kind of challenges associated with it, but it's also kind of like a really, really interesting way to think about collaboration and think about what we can do as well. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers the question.
Well, thanks, Lizzie. We've got another question.
Great.
Are your gigs ever recorded, and how do you feel about capturing the live moment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Sometimes gigs are recorded, and I actually quite like, so you can kind of set it up on your computer where you can kind of record the sound and then listen back to it later. And I think that is really interesting. But there is also this nice thing about having it be, you know, I was talking about at the end there, you have this randomness. So basically it's kind of the computer's choosing, and it's going to choose in a way that it's never going to choose the same thing. Like you can't make it choose in the same way every single time. It's going to do kind of whatever it wants to do. So, you know, when you're playing live, you are kind of doing this thing that's only happening once, and it's kind of like, it's really unique in that way. But yeah, I mean, I don't have any problems with kind of recording myself, but at the same time, there is this really nice aspect of it with this kind of like liveness where it's happening once, and it happens how it happens, and you just kind of have to accept whatever it is that kind of comes out of your computer. So yeah.
Well, we've probably got time for one more question, so I'm going to try and combine a couple of them.
Great.
So we've got a question from Ellie that says, what would you say is the most challenging part of creating code or performing live? And then also a question about how, on a scale of 1 to 10, how hard do you think it is to learn TidalCycles?
Okay. The most challenging thing is, I'll say getting it wrong, but actually it's just accepting that it will go wrong sometimes, and that's okay. I think that's kind of a big part of like the ethos of live coding as well, is this idea of like error, and especially with computers, you know, you think that it should go, you know, exactly as planned, but actually there is kind of all these kind of uncertainties as well. And I think, I mean, obviously any musician has that too. So it's kind of just like a way of thinking about music, right? You just have to accept what happens. And what I'm trying to do is just kind of convey as well as possible what I want to convey. And then the second question on how hard it is on a scale of 1 to 10, I think it really depends on the person. Like, obviously, if you're coming, like, it will help you to have coding experience. So if you are someone who knows how to code, you'll kind of understand it more initially because you kind of have that background knowledge. But, you know, for me, I really didn't know much at all about coding when I started. And I kind of just got into it by following lots and lots of kind of links that other people were sharing. And a lot of people, again, will share their code. Like I like to share all my code after a performance. So, you know, there's lots of kind of help out there in the community, and that really helps get you into it. So I don't know if I can give it a number out of 10, but I think, yeah, it just depends. And I think if you're someone who kind of, this is interesting to, and you want to spend a bit of time learning it, then, you know, I don't think it's particularly hard to master. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Lizzie.
No worries.
We should probably wrap up now, but thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you so much, Lizzie, for showing us how you make music with code. And we hope you all enjoyed the masterclasses as much as I did. We would really love to know what everyone enjoyed about the session and how else Sound and Music can support young composers and music creators. So we will be writing to you with a short online questionnaire, but so keep a lookout for that, and it would be great if you could just spend like 5 minutes completing it, just so we have that feedback. If you'd like to find out more about any of our events and educational opportunities and programs, you can head to our website, which is www.soundandmusic.org. I would also just like to say a very special thank you to our funders, and they are Lucille Graham Trust, Boris Karloff Charitable Foundation, Bliss Trust, Samuel Gardner Memorial Trust, Finzi Trust, Radcliffe Trust, Three Monkeys, Marchers Trust, the Estate of Margaret Ennering, and the Doyley Cart Charitable Trust. So on that note, I just want to say thank you all again, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.